Still live. Oh, we're live. Sorry. Hi, Colin. Welcome to Venture with Grace.
Thanks for having me on, Grace. It's an honor.
To start the show, I would love for the audience to learn more about you. You started your career as a marketing intern, actually. Yeah. So, why don't we start with and then you did investment banking. Now you're a partner at Next47. Maybe we could give the audience a little bit more background of like the core lessons that you learned early on in your career that you kind of took into who you are today.
Right. Yeah. Well, my first internship was actually at a investment firm that was kind of like a mutual fund. So they invested in a whole bunch of things, and I was working under an investor who was very focused on natural resources and particularly gold mines. So we were actually having people come in and pitch us like, "Hey, we have this piece of land, like we're going to strike gold, literally." And I think that experience for me really was my first experience just putting in a lot of like research to come up with like a differentiated view. I remember the person I was working for had me do like a final project at the end of my internship that was very, very open-ended. And she was just said like, look at the zinc market, like look at every single public company that mines for zinc. And try and come up with like a thesis in the space. So I literally spent 3 weeks just reading through all of the public documents that these companies had about their mines and like basically like the proven and probable reserves, like how much zinc they thought was like remaining in their mines. And I think over the course of 3 weeks, I slowly realized that like a lot of really major mines would be coming offline in the next like year or two, and kind of came up with the thesis that there might be a shortage in zinc and therefore like a price increase. But so like that was just a cool first experience for me of like conviction or like some idea kind of appearing out of like weeks of work, how it just kind of slowly comes into view, and like I think that sort of led me to really get interested in like that type of research and coming up with opinions like that.
Love that. So what happened to the zinc investments? I guess.
So I mean, I think my thesis was somewhat correct. So like the idea was, if the prices go up, then you should invest in like zinc recycling. So zinc is actually used on top of steel to help prevent it from oxidizing. And so, you can recycle it. So I think that was my thesis. I think for the next year or two, like the price of zinc went up. So, but I'm not sure like if how much they really acted on this intern's, kind of wild idea that I had. But yeah, that was, so I don't know. I don't know really how much attention they paid to it after my 2 months working there.
Amazing. Well, I like that. I feel like that's such a unique experience, and also like deep tech's like making a comeback right now. So maybe that's a very popular thing soon.
Sure.
Why don't we talk about like since after investment banking, you started like working at Next47. Maybe you could give us a little bit background on like Next47, and maybe we could talk about like fund and check size and sector that you're interested in.
Sure. Yeah. So we focus on all sorts of B2B startups, and we're a pretty global firm. So I work out of our office in Palo Alto, where we have most of our investors, but we also have investors in London and Tel Aviv and Munich. And so we focus mostly at the Series A to Series C stage, and we like to lead rounds. So our checks go up to about $40 million. And, within B2B, we do things like, infrastructure, software, like dev tools, cybersecurity. I spend a lot of time in tools that sell to maybe more technical end users within the enterprise. So like a security person, an engineer, someone on the data team. But we also have a lot of SaaS investments, that go from things like HR tech and sales tech to more like verticalized pieces of software. And we also have a good amount of hardware companies in our portfolio, like companies that do robotics or computer vision. Some of our largest companies in our portfolio actually have a hardware element to them. So companies like Verkada, cloud connected security camera, or Skydio, like an autonomous drone company. So yeah, I think when I was first interviewing at Next47, I really liked that focus, that I could, do some of the work on categories I already knew that I really liked, like cybersecurity, but also get to explore some pretty cool areas of deep tech.
Totally. Okay, so I want to start with maybe the most like recent podcast I've heard you are on. You guys talk a lot about like platform engineering, and then you have a really popular article. Maybe you could share with the audience about like, your insights on platform engineering.
Right. Yeah. So platform engineering, I feel like, has come up as like the next buzzword after DevOps, essentially.
Mhm.
And some people are kind of dismissive of the term, but I do think that it's a pretty helpful pattern to follow, like within like how you kind of devise your org chart, more or less, like how your engineers like that work on applications can interact with like maybe the team that is building tools for those engineers to do their job like better and more efficiently. Basically the ops team that is also helping with like the infrastructure the apps are running on, and like actually monitoring those apps to make sure everything's running smoothly. And I think the general idea behind just enabling the developers that work on apps to have a more self-service way to build those apps. That's really what platform engineering is all about. Is like giving developers enough flexibility that they can build apps in the way that they want, like use have some flexibility of choice in like the frameworks that they're using to build apps, but also allow the ops team that is building the platform, so to speak, that these developers are using to like set some kind of global rules and guidelines that can't be altered. Because sometimes if you let devs run wild, you'll have a super heterogeneous infrastructure with like all sorts of different tools that kind of overlap, and that's a huge pain to kind of maintain and not very efficient. So I think there's been a number of categories within DevOps that kind of get at this pattern. There's tools like internal developer portals, IDPs, that are kind of like becoming the UI for like DevOps and like developers to access their services and see at a high level like all the different services that like they're responsible for, like high level what they do, like if they're like what the health metrics are. So like integrating with observability tools, integrating with like infrastructure as code tools to spin up new applications, kind of putting all of that together in a nice UI. I think IDPs have been like one of the most successful kind of categories within this new kind of platform engineering ideology. But there are lots of other kind of categories too, like ephemeral developer environments that spin up environments for people to test their applications without like having to share one kind of piece of infrastructure. Everybody gets their own super tailored environment for what they need. Like I think those are two kind of categories that we've been following closely in that space. But writ large, I think just anything to kind of simplify and kind of provide an API almost for developers to be able to use the tools that the enterprise has given the green light.
Totally. Can I ask some questions about your article? So this is
Sure.
like the OG article about platform
Yeah.
engineering. Maybe can you give us like a little background on like these different subsegments? Like for example, developer portals,
Right.
IAC, platform orchestration. So like basically how much money are people actually spending on this? And then how do you quickly filter out like the things that don't matter versus like, company that you actually will pay attention to?
Right. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot of money being spent in these general categories, but sometimes it's difficult for startups to access. Like so within developer, like I mean, developer portals is like a relatively new, I think, bucket of spend actually. So like that is like a new kind of SaaS application that integrates with a whole bunch of other tools. So I think this is pretty new, definitely exciting. That you've seen some open source approaches like Backstage that actually comes from Spotify of all places. So like, and they actually kind of sell this, I think, also as a business line. So there's tons of open source approaches here, so you can do it all for free. But I have heard of people of like very large contracts for IDPs like starting to happen at large enterprises. I mean, infrastructure as code. You see companies like HashiCorp that have made a lot of money with tools like Terraform Cloud. Making license changes to make sure they can kind of protect that spend. So that's a pretty well established bucket of spend here. Within platform orchestration, that's been a tough one because I think a lot of the times you're kind of developing almost like a protocol or some kind of syntax or format to help like map what a developer has set up on their local environment to like the infrastructure in the cloud, because that's like a big difference from working on your laptop to like a highly scalable application. So you have seen like companies like Docker, I think, kind of fit somewhat into this space with like Docker Desktop, but like I think this is like maybe a less clearly defined bucket of spend. And then developer environments, I think, is like a space that companies probably spend, like large enterprises may spend like $100 million a year on keeping like not just their production environment running, but like their staging environment and their testing environment. Like that's all kind of running on the cloud. So in a way, that's really like just cloud spend is kind of the market that these developer environment startups are going after. So obviously it's super attractive, but then the question becomes like, well, how much value are you adding on top of just like this AWS spend, right? Like I think the same kind of questions get asked for some of these like deployment tools below. People sometimes call Vercel like an AWS wrapper, and like to some extent, yeah, it is. But you need to kind of provide certain levels of useful abstraction on top of the compute and like the cloud services from the cloud service providers to make it worthwhile. And clearly, developers have found it useful. I think Vercel has been an awesome kind of success case for developer tools. So there's a mix within here of large trying to take a piece of kind of cloud spend to like totally net new markets like IDPs, incident management as well, like a really well defined bucket of spend that we see from like the observability players, but also like public companies like PagerDuty.
Can I ask, like, so basically, like, I guess, like, is this the CTO spending money on like all these different stacks, or like how do you, I guess, like, for example, like for a tech company, how much does people spend on engineering tools versus like the engineers themselves versus other spending? Like maybe if you have like any stats on, like, for example, let's call it like 30% of the entire startup fundraise spend on engineering resources, and then like how much do people like actually paying attention to each of these different subsector? So it sounds like the environment is basically a no because of like AWS and everything else, but like um how much does people like, I don't, it doesn't have to be a number because like I'm not sure like how much 100 million meant for like a big company versus small company, but like I guess like how would you categorize like the importance of like this graph in
Yeah.
the subsector of each graph based on like how much people are spending, and then how will, like, I mean, as cringe as sounds, but like how will AI impact the spending?
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of the budget sometimes sits with like the DevOps
Mhm.
people. Because I think like at the engineering level, if you're really thinking about the tools that that engineers use, a lot of the time, they are using frameworks that are open source, or they're kind of they're building the business logic, and really a lot of the times what they're paying for is kind of the infrastructure to host it on. So yeah, I think there's an interesting debate over like who has like the most budget. Is it like the kind of ops operating stuff? Is it like the Datadog bill that you
Wait,
pay?
I have another question for you. So like
Yeah.
when you're actually writing this graph, like how do you like also just go to like the public data, like the public company on like how much they're spending on each sub segment, or like, but how do you know? Like, are they actually gonna spend? Are they actually gonna write it on there to be like, hey, we spend like 75 million on clutch,
Yeah.
or
Right. It's hard to
or
find.
Pando?
No, you're not going to find. I wish that they would. I wish enterprises would give a detailed list of what they spend. Sometimes you can find some articles when they're bragging about how they've reduced their spend on
Oh,
something. That might give you, some hints. I think you can kind of see also people complaining about bills, right? And so sometimes people are complaining about like more recently, like their observability bills. That's like actually kind of something people always complain about, from things like, oh, I pay so much money for storing a ton of data in Splunk, or I pay so much money for Datadog. But I think the people pay a lot of money for tools to make sure that like their app stays running. People pay a lot of money for things that kind of are close to their top line. So
mhm,
making sure your app doesn't go down on Black Friday if you're an e-commerce site is critical. And so you'll see a lot of spend there. You'll see a lot of spend on like the cloud service providers, obviously for compute and for storage. But like in some ways you can kind of think of that also as like infrastructure. So like it's very hard to extract dollars, I think, out of engineers for tools that really are more applying to like the business logic
mhm.
that they're writing. I think they're very reticent to pay for that. So yeah, I think a lot of the budget, and markets that we end up looking at tend to be geared towards like the infrastructure that these apps run on. But like, yeah, how do we divide? Like, so there's really not a great way to, the market sizing, definitely a bit of an art, but it's kind of looking at, the public companies that exist. So you can at least try and see their top line, maybe like think about, well, they have 3 different products. How do you segment out, Terraform for, within HashiCorp, like probably won't break it out super nicely in like, their financial statements. So you got to read the earnings call transcripts and kind of see if anyone's asked any questions of the CEO or CFO, trying to get more detail on like the segmentation. It's definitely very, very difficult.
I have a question. So,
Yeah.
like, which company would you actually listen to these calls to? Like, I mean, is that like a Google, or like what's like an ideal company to actually study? And when you're like listening to the calls, like, do you just search keywords like these companies' name, or like do you search security or like
Mhm.
developer, or like what are the keywords that you would search in a transcript, or you just like sit there and like actually hear the whole thing?
Or well, I guess the way I was thinking of it was like if I was say for the infrastructure as code bucket here, if I
Mhm,
was trying to think like how much money does HashiCorp make on Terraform, which is like their infrastructure as code tool,
mhm,
because HashiCorp, until recently was one of like the few public companies like that would actually, give you like a top line. You can have a top line revenue number and see how the growth is trending. So I would be like looking at their quarterly earnings transcripts and trying to see, search for like if Terraform has ever come up specifically in a question, because sometimes you can get like more detailed kind of segmentation of revenue from like either the earnings call transcripts, or sometimes they put out some earnings presentations that will have like breakdowns. But ultimately that's still a very partial view. You can maybe back into it by saying HashiCorp has five or six kind of major products. So if we divide their revenue by 5 or 6, that gives you maybe some average. Or understand that like HashiCorp Vault maybe is their biggest product, like revenue driving product. So you try and learn a bit and do some kind of rough math. But yeah, this is why it's really tough to do market sizing. And a lot of times it's just gives you kind of an indication. You don't necessarily want to be super specific about it, but just like get an indication that there is real spend there. And so, going through the transcript can definitely help you just like at least validate that there's like $100 million, $200 million of spend that's up for grabs in this category.
I want to ask another cringy question. So, like the founders would put like the total addressable market, like for like each of these subcategory, like what is a good like market size for a company, and like what is like a realistic and
$1 billion.
like,
No, I mean it's hard. Yeah, I know, right? It's a really hard question. I think like the way and everyone defines market size differently. I think about it as like the actual dollars spent in a given year, like on that topic, on that problem. It might range across like both spend on tools, but also like spend on headcount to just like manually achieve this whatever goal you're going for. And so I think that tends to maybe be a bit more of a conservative view of like market size than someone who is saying, well, this company sells for like $200 per engineer per month. And, there are X many million engineers in the world. So let's just multiply those two numbers together and get some like theoretical market size, right? If everyone was paying for this, how big would the market be? So I tend to look at it more of like the real dollars spent per year. And I feel like, in the early days of some of like, if you're investing in a new market, there may only be like $20-30 million being spent per year on that problem. And in that case, you really have to believe that this is going to grow, that adoption is very early, that the adoption rate is going to, grow really quickly and is not going to like tap out, into only specific like segments of the market that end up using this. I think that was like, for example, when we were investing in Noname Security, which like was focused on API security, that was like a very, very new market. Like not necessarily just securing APIs was a new market, but just being a pure play vendor that sold API security was relatively new. And like at the time, there were only a couple of vendors doing that. They were all startups. So that the market is not in like the hundreds of millions today. But the question is like, how big will that be, over time, over the next 5 years to 10 years? And then there are some just like perennially massive markets, like, observability. You can name like multiple public companies in observability or really large companies. You look at companies like Datadog and Splunk, and like there are companies like AppDynamics, that were acquired, but they're just like, you can clearly identify a massive market there just by looking at like naming off a few companies. You get to like hundreds of millions of dollars of top line. But you can really invest in both. There are just definitely very different considerations for each.
But I feel like Splunk and Datadog were like there for a long time. And how do you think about like what are some like new companies that actually have the advantage to like challenge these like incumbents? Are they incumbents? They are. So
right, yeah. Are they incumbents yet? Like that's always fun, right? To think about when is a company legacy, and startup founders will call anything that is over 6 years old, like a legacy company. And I think that the timing of markets is really important. Obviously we look for really differentiated founders and products, but like there's also the element, like the competitive element. If you are following some company that is like maybe 3-4 years ahead of you, you have a product that's better than theirs, but they're still on like an absolute tear of growth. Like that's very, very challenging to compete with. So I think, you really need to look at, good times to enter markets. Maybe like a really big, player just got acquired. HashiCorp just, got acquired by IBM. Maybe that leaves an opening in the market, or Auth0 just got acquired by Okta. Like maybe that left an opening, in the market for people to tackle. So yeah, like that, like considering what really is becoming legacy, is a big question that we're always asking ourselves when we're evaluating a startup.
How would you think about like, I guess like, for example, let's say Auth0 is acquired by Okta, and like, do you just back their competitor like from the ground up, or like what level of competitor do you feel like actually would have an advantage? Because I feel like if you're backing the seed or pre-seed, like obviously it's like it's gonna take them 5 years to like go somewhere. But if you are backing something that's like more later stage, like how would you, I guess, like what does a diligence process look like for you to like feel comfortable to putting a check in?
Mm-hmm. I think like there has to be a point of differentiation that is super significant. It's hard to like succinctly put it into words, but if you could back, maybe like you don't necessarily have to back like the newest player. Like once the incumbent has been acquired, maybe there's someone who's been in the market for 4 years who has like built up enough of an advantage that they're the right one to back. I think that does get harder in today's day and age when there's such a massive shift, like that the transformer model and like LLMs have provided. I think it does make it a little bit harder for companies that have been in the market for like 6 years to kind of give their why now. So I do think that has shifted like the advantage perhaps a bit towards like the newest companies, that are coming out and can say that they're AI native. But yeah, I think you really want to look for a point of differentiation. People will often say this, but it's like a 10x difference, not like a 10% difference. Sometimes I think the points of differentiation being more, pitched as like things that are more like decisions than like real like differentiation. Like, oh, if that is only cloud hosted and we can host it on-prem, like that's kind of like often like a thin point of differentiation versus like we have a completely different like paradigm of the way that our product is like implemented, and like it gives you like a visibility into this thing you could never see before. That's kind of the type of distinction that we're looking for to back like a new entrant.
Mm. How would you say, maybe like we could use any of your current portfolio as an example? You
Mhm.
mentioned about like Noname Security or Harmonic.
Mhm.
Like how do you think
Yeah.
about like, can you describe how you found the company, to diligence it, to like winning the deal, to thinking about exiting? I don't think you're thinking about exiting. I'm just saying like
Yeah.
really evaluate a company's exit potential to invest.
Sure. Yeah, I can talk about Harmonic Security, which was a recent investment that I made. I think I just came across the company because I was going to a security event,
Mhm.
and I noticed like the founder Alistair had founded a company in the past that I had was also familiar with, called Digital Shadows.
Mhm.
So I got in touch with him, and we got really excited about Harmonic because they're applying the capabilities of language models to an existing problem within security, which is data protection, and making sure that sensitive data isn't leaving your enterprise. Harmonic's initial wedge was focused actually, on large language models, like employees using, you can imagine using ChatGPT or Claude, any of these public LLMs. You can imagine that employees might be putting some sensitive data in there, and you may not always be paying for like the enterprise version where they don't train on your data. So if you have people putting customer information in, that you could actually, that could be a serious kind of breach of policy. And Harmonic was using language models to determine if sensitive data is like indeed sensitive or not. In the past, like the approach was to use these very like explicit regex rules that would find the format of like a social security number. So you had to very explicitly define like what you were looking for, very formulaically. Whereas like with language models now, you can easily describe things like an investment memo that you previously like couldn't create like a regex rule to find. But like with Harmonic, you can kind of leverage language models to see is Colton putting, like a whole customer list of a portfolio company like into ChatGPT? Like let's prevent that from happening, right? So like they're seeing a lot of traction with like financial institutions, insurance companies where people write like insurance claims, all sorts of like basically new types of documents that people couldn't very easily like identify and create policy around. So that was like general thesis of applying language models to data protection, like really drove our interest. The founders, having previously worked at Digital Shadows, which looked at finding sensitive data that was leaked out into the web, like searching tons and tons of volume of internet data for company names and like company data. They had like a great background to take this like pretty adjacent problem on. A lot of our diligence involves just talking to the buyer, talking in this case to CISOs, and asking them how much of a concern is it of employees like leaking data into LLMs, or how is your existing like data loss prevention tools working? How are they providing a lot of value, or are they a ton of false positives, and like really getting candid feedback from the market. The product is really what we spend the most time like diligencing along with the founders. It's less so, especially at the Series A stage, like the financial growth metrics, and I think much more about how the founders are positioning like the product in the market.
How do you, like, first of all, I wrote down some like really detailed like random questions, but like how would you find, like, what event would you go to find founders like this to have like a deeper conversation? Because I find, obviously RSA was last week. I was not there, but but I went to like some like side events. Like, how do you quickly filter out like which event is like worth, like, or like what kind of event do you meet founders like this?
Sure.
And another question is like, so for example, since like he is a second time founder, the first company were like pretty decently successful and it got acquired for $160 million. And how do you think about like I guess like that maybe just like come down to winning the deal? Like, how do you think about like how many second time founder are in the security space, and then like how do you pick which one to invest in or not, or like maybe you just try to get in it?
But, good questions. So on the event side, I go to pretty standard events for like security and like developer tools. So in the security space, like I went to RSA last week. I go to Black Hat every year as well in Las Vegas. And those are like the primary ones for security. Like I think I met Alistair at a Cynet event. But I also go to KubeCon every year and like to get more like find more developer tool focused companies. and AWS reInvent. Those are some of the core ones that I pretty consistently go to, and then I try to mix in some new ones every year, like the AI Engineer World Fair. I thought was a
AI
great
Engineer Warfare.
the World Fair. Yeah, it's an awesome name. So I went to that last year. I thought that was great. I'll definitely go again this year. And then sorry, what your second question was about?
Like winning deal of
founders,
second-time
right?
founders.
Yeah. So at Next47, we have a pretty unique model where we have we really help our founders with go-to-market. And a lot of VCs will have like a business development team. That's definitely like nothing new, but I think we have like a very large business development team of around 10 people that generate leads for our portfolio companies. So, for security, for instance, we're constantly reaching out to CISOs, kind of getting them involved in our network. And when we make a new investment, we call them up and try and qualify who might like legitimately be interested as a potential lead for our portfolio company. And we really run that like a sales team. We pay all those reps, we pay all of their compensation. Like there's variable comp that's tied to the goals that the founders set. And I think that, and we've landed over 300 deals across our portfolio, just to kind of shamelessly brag there for a second. So like that really helps, I think, resonate with second time founders of just like that we really try to provide a lot of value, and that we also have a very deep understanding of like day to day what our startups are going through, because like I'm on a call like with our go to market team, like actually like pitching the company like pretty frequently, and getting like real time feedback. What resonates, where are we getting objections? So I think that we definitely use that as like part of what differentiates us from other VC firms, and that I think that type of value add definitely resonates with second time founders.
I guess like how do you pick which second time founder to invest in, because there is also a lot of them, I think.
Right. It's hard. It's hard to make like any explicit rules, right? Because like, you might want to say, oh, well, you want a founder that didn't have a successful exit, so they still have a chip on their shoulder. But I think that of course, backing successful founders also is like really great. So I think you just really want to gauge like their motivation to do this all again, but like backing very experienced founders like dramatically de-risks the investment. They've like been through it all and kind of persevered through a lot of problems, and they can kind of bring that with them into this new venture. So I don't think I diligence second time founders too much, like any differently than other founders, just taking all of their background into consideration. I think I try to run some thought exercises like about like founders, because I think that the profiles can be so multifaceted. But can you see this person speaking on CNBC one day because their company just went public, or can you see this person like making a really tough call to like fire somebody, and so can they, like, are they really evaluating if they're very product obsessed, if they can be decisive, be inspiring to like encourage other people to join and follow them, and be incredibly resilient. And I think we just kind of will evaluate founders like across those metrics, in all cases.
Wait, I have a question. Do you have like a checklist and then you just like rank them in like 1 to 10, or like is this like a vibe check that you're just like?
We don't have like there's no like explicit checklist. That's all like, those are all just like kind of thought experiments that I like to kind of think through. But no, it's like it's we don't have like any super explicit formula for it.
How do you think about like, I guess like, okay, so for example, for like a deal like Harmonic or like other companies, like how long does it take you to process the entire information? For example, let's say you met this guy at this event, and then what? Like, do you have like, oh, the coffee chat must happen within a week, and then you meet the whole team, and then I don't know, they come in and pitch you and your whole team, and like, I guess like, how do you space out
Mhm.
the time? And then like, for the time that you're not doing this deal, like, do you process like 500 deals at once, or like you constantly hear about people just like, oh, sorry, I have to chase a deal today. And like, what does that even mean? Like, it's not like you just go home and like be like, go on, I don't know, OpenAI deep research or something, and then like dig stuff up on like understand what they're building, or do you talk to like three CISOs in your network to be like, "Hey, will you actually use this company?" But the problem of like actually getting experts in is like, okay, so there's like two parts of the experts, right? Like one part is like their motivation to help you. Maybe they invest in like a competitor and then they're like, "Oh yeah, like no, this suck."
Right.
And or let's say they are genuinely trying to help you, but they just like don't I don't know, like people may not have time or like give you like
Yeah.
the super superficial feedback. How do you like really leverage a network to like diligence something if
Yeah.
that's like the case?
You need a big network. I think that's the answer. You can't necessarily be calling up the same person, every time that, like, if you have like a, security person, like that, calling them for every single deal, like, probably won't work. So, fortunately we have a lot of people in our network. So we can kind of, uh, send out a message to everybody saying, hey, like, who's actually, like, thinking about this topic, to kind of.
Wait, what would you say in the message? Like, I'm sorry, I'm like getting into so much detail, but I'm just like visualizing this.
Right. So I mean, we try to bring people into like our network, like CISOs,
Mhm.
just by like offering them things like we'll put you in a group with other CISOs to be able to network. We don't offer them compensation or anything. So we're always looking for ways to kind of add, like, because in some ways that kind of biases them too. So
Mhm.
we're looking for ways to kind of add value without necessarily like putting them on our payroll. And so we found ways to do that over time. And we've, what that really looks like is, yeah, a bunch of people on a Slack channel, and it's very straightforward, just dropping a message in like, hey, have any of you guys considered, like, employee usage of AI tools as a risk? Like, is that a risk you guys are thinking about? And anyone raises their hand, yes. Like, what we can kind of offer them is, hey, we've been thinking about this space. We've been thinking about all the different companies here. We have an opinion. Do you want to hop on the phone for 15 minutes and like hear what we have to say? Like, often we'll have materials that we can send them. So, we have a lot of people in our network who are just like very interested in staying up to date with like the latest trends. And just, yeah, hey, are you willing to hop on the phone for 5-10 minutes? Unfortunately, we have like dozens and dozens of people, of CISOs in our network, and dozens of VPs of Eng in our network. So we can really like rotate it around and not, use one person like too much.
Okay, so I have another question on this. So basically, thinking about building that Slack group, right? So you
Mhm.
kind of want like at least like the thought leaders in the space, like say, oh no, CISO of like a really. We have some great CISOs on our podcast, by the way. So like, I want to know like, so basically,
I should
okay,
meet them.
uh, you should, but I'll introduce you sometime. But anyway, so basically, let's say when they are in the Slack group, and then like it can't be like random people, right? Like, so it have to be like people in their caliber. But the problem is like people in their caliber, there's only like six of them. And like if you just like drop a question, my biggest fear is like no one's gonna answer. Like, and then do you have to literally DM one person to be like, can you answer in the group? Or like how do you really get the conversation going and like not being like overly, pursuing this group or like just like uh
Yeah.
I don't know, like, it's, like, a lot of, like, I don't know, soft skill, but maybe I'm just, like, thinking so much because I feel like, I don't wanna bother people, but on the other hand, if you don't bother people, this is not gonna move forward.
Right.
Um, How do you kind of like deal with that? And then I know that you mentioned about like a big network, but like you can't really add like 200 people in a group, and then that group is like dead or like organically.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, I think it's like, well, initially just having like a good couple conversations just so they can get to know us, like, and get comfortable with like, hey, here's what we can offer you in terms of like, we'll send you our market maps when they come out. We, host dinners like around the Bay Area or New York, which you can join. But I don't think, generally, I think we look for people who are like decision makers for their firm. But that's kind of the only, qualification we'd have for like a specific role, for a CISO or a VP of Eng, like, is just that they're, kind of pretty senior or like the decision maker for their company, because like they will be a valuable they need to be someone we would want to introduce like the CEO of our portfolio company to, like, and this person can, quickly get to like a buying decision. So that's really the only qualification we have for adding people all like into that group. And we try to just provide, beyond just like asking questions all the time, like just provide our perspective. So like, it's really just like every week or so, hey, we've been thinking about this space, here are like some of the companies in the space, and then also can get people's feedback as well, but just kind of giving them a more up-to-date look at, some of the sectors that we're exploring or topics, and trying to ask questions of the group that like they all might find useful, that may not always just be focused around vendors, but like, how do you focus on hiring or like retention of your employees, that like, things that just, help facilitate the conversation. But yeah, I think it isn't always just drop a question in the group. Like sometimes you need to just reach out to people directly over email. So we do that, and just ask for like a quick 5-minute phone call. That's really all we need to get, like a decent read on a perspective on a company.
What are the questions that you would be asking them? And so, for example, all these like soft things, I feel like, so for the CISOs that they're probably getting invited by like every VC firm or like 500 other people. So how do you like make it valuable enough for them to like actually show? And like, do you put like people into different categories? So for example, let's say CISO of, I don't know, Pinterest is very different than CISO from, I don't know, Chase Bank. So how do you like, do you put everybody into the same group? And like, are they gonna face a different security questions because they're in like very drastically different industries? And on the other hand, like for example, when you have these trends, like how do you prep yourself with these trends? It's not like just like you Googling something and then write a market map and then be like, hey, yo, like here's what we found. And like, do you agree or disagree? Or like, how do you make the conversation meaningful? And also it's like a lower lift for you. You can't just be like, oh, pumping out trend every week, right? So how do you do it in like a efficient way for yourself, but also like not like it's also providing value, but also like I guess like separate people to different groups.
Yeah, I think, maybe a week, a category every week, I would aspire to that, but it's that I think it takes sometimes a bit more than that. But I think as long as if you read all of the documentation for like 10 startups in a space.
What is documentation?
Sorry, what was your question?
What is documentation? Is that like the data room of like startups or like,
right? So thinking more from the lines of like a developer tool. Like often, like they'll have something called like the documentation, which is like
a white paper
kind of like the white paper, but like the instructions for developers who are like trying to set this up themselves. Like here's exactly how you use it. Here's how you kind of learn the syntax. Like, so compared to a lot of like SaaS companies, which have like a lot of marketing language and stuff, like dev tools have a lot of like very concrete documentation that like gives you a great, like I think sometimes a deeper understanding of how the product works than some other tools. So like if I've read all of like, and so imagine it's just like, 15, 20 pages of like pretty dense like explanation of feature by feature, like what they do and how those features work and how to implement those. So I think like if you kind of do the work to like deeply kind of think through all of the features that like all of the key companies in a specific vertical offer and like kind of how they stack up against each other, that's pretty valuable to like kind of share, like visualize, but also just like talk about that with like a VP of Eng, right? Like thinking about about the whole universe. We've been thinking about the whole universe of like post commit like tools, like so after you've used Cursor or like one of these IDE co-pilots, and you need to like test your code, like review your code, document your code, maintain your code, like what are all of the tools. Like we've kind of looked through like dozens of those, and VPs of Eng are open to talking with us to hear about, okay, like what's next now that I've introduced like Cursor to my whole team, and I've got it like up and running, like what else should I be thinking of? And we can kind of get them up to speed a little bit faster by just like saying, here's the whole universe of like 50 companies that do this. Here are the ones that we think are extra compelling, and try and like facilitate introductions.
I love that. Like, where do you find these code documentations? Just literally on their website?
Yeah, like if you like, often there will be like open source projects associated with these companies, but not always. But yeah, they tend to be more like developer tools, and it'll be like in the top tab. But I think like you can, super useful for like, using LLM kind of tools to decipher also like what a company does. Like that documentation is awesome context to kind of like run some Q&A on.
Do you use ChatGPT to read them? Or like, do you just read them? And like,
I do read them, but I think it's helpful to use ChatGPT to like decipher sometimes. Like, give me an example of like why, like they have this feature, like why would this be used, or they refer to this kind of topic, like tell me more about that. So like instead of kind of Googling things, I'll be kind of like using ChatGPT to like just give me more elaboration on certain things.
Do you use ChatGPT or cloud? Or
we have a enterprise version of ChatGPT, so
okay.
I like to use that because it's just like more secure from a data perspective. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm taking notes. So when you're like, I mean, when you, how do you pick the 10 company that you're reading through? Is this like the 10 company that was on TechCrunch last week, or like, is this more of like you have to dig deeper to meet someone at a dinner or event, or like how do you select the 10 company that you're like deep diving into?
Right. I mean, that's the $1 million question, I think. But I won't lie, there is a lot of Googling. It is, exhaustive Googling. I mean, frankly, in a lot of the spaces that I look at, you're going to a lot of events and things. So you do start to just kind of see like a universe of companies. So you probably have like an indication of like, oh, I've heard of like these two companies in this space, right? And then like as you're looking through the whole universe of like websites, check on YouTube, obviously. There's like so many unstructured kind of data sources around the internet, where you'll just start to see other companies kind of mentioned alongside. Also, you'll be speaking to experts like who have used one of these tools, and you can kind of see like, well, what else did you evaluate alongside this tool that you use? And, so you speak to 4 or 5 people, you start to get like this kind of universe of companies. But yeah, finding those kind of like unstructured sources, I think it's always really fun to try and find them. Like you can sometimes find websites where people kind of talk about the stacks of tools that they use, or you can find like reviews that people will put online of tools, whether it's like on a review site or people mentioning it on Reddit or other forums. So it's I think a lot of the alpha is in trying to find those like unstructured sources on the web.
Taking notes. Unstructured data on the web. What would be the keyword that you use to search them?
Well, I think it would totally vary depending on the company. So, I think it's really just search. Frankly, it's just like searching the company name into all sorts of places. Like, hey, check Reddit. Has anyone mentioned this company? Check YouTube. Has anyone put up a video on this company? But maybe there's nothing on the company's name, but maybe if you search the founder's name, they've actually done some 45-minute interviews, describing in a lot more detail their product that like isn't actually on the website. So you're trying to find like where information is maybe less indexed, that like not everybody has easy access to, right? And like that's where you can find some kind of interesting tidbits.
What are things that you would be looking for in these research?
Well, I think it's definitely looking for unique product features primarily, I think, but all like, understanding how the founder pitches like themselves, and what kind of like, unique insight they have on the market. Like how do they, like, are they good at marketing? Like all everything kind of plays into the equation a bit. But I think you're really looking for an idea, like a concept that kind of like jumps off the page, so to speak.
Totally. Okay, so this will be my last real question. I just realized we're
Mhm.
really at the time. Okay, so another question is like, how do you keep like a clean notes on documentation for your own thoughts? Because I feel like it sounds like you are doing a lot of research on like different subjects. But I feel like how do you I guess like put them into a documentation format? Like, is this like on Excel or like do you
Yeah,
do like an Airtable and then rank? I mean, obviously you just said you don't rank anything, but uh,
yeah.
for
I do
example,
sometimes think it's a good exercise to think like, what are the top 10 companies, I'd want to break into right now. But yeah, we don't have a super explicit like stack ranking of companies. I think like there's a lot more I'm sure I could use with my notes, because right now they're just kind of in a big OneNotes, like, in OneNote with like individual, pages for every single company. And it's great to right now be able to like search, for a keyword across all of those things. But I'm sure a ton more I haven't like uploaded all of those to ChatGPT or anything like that. So, when we find a secure way to do that, I'm sure we will set something up. But yeah, right now it's just all kind of in a OneNote, just relatively unstructured.
love. Okay, so relatively out of structure.
We have like a CR. We have like a CRM and stuff. Like, so we will have notes attached to every company there. But like, yeah, my OneNotes is a bit of the Wild West.
Okay, so let's end with like a quick one fire run. So, what's your favorite book?
Recently, I read a book that I really liked called Other Minds, that talks about actually like what's like the subjective experience of consciousness for like humans versus animals.
Mhm.
And like that kind of ties back to my major. I was a Symbolic Systems major at Stanford, that really like tries to answer the question of what is intelligence. So it was like learning about like how octopuses may experience the world. They can like, change colors. They have like limbs that like operate autonomously from their central brain. They can see through their skin almost in a way. So yeah, I just think it's interesting to think about different types of intelligence, as we kind of are on the quest to build artificial intelligence that may not always look exactly like the human form of intelligence.
Actually, like I was moderating a panel in AWS, and then the speaker mentioned that like AI has consciousness. Do you think AI has consciousness?
I think that's a really hard question. I think not yet. I think there's like, but I think it's a combination of a whole bunch of different like properties of like really sensing sensing the world and being able to achieve goals in the world. And right now, I don't think we have like a single system that could really kind of survive too well on its own. So I don't think we're there yet.
Love. Okay, so that's really scary because like I feel like I've been constantly recommended by like these like movie clips of like the AI just killed the person or something, like vice versa. I don't know. It was
Yeah,
pretty scary.
I think we're a long way away from there, but
Hopefully.
who knows where we are on the exponential curve here.
Who would you invite to your dinner party?
Well, I'd invite a lot of founders, a lot of VPs of Eng, a lot of a lot of CISOs to buy their products. Right? That's definitely the type of dinner party I'm trying to put together. But no, I mean, so like, what would make it fun? I think we get like David Blaine to come. Maybe to provide some entertainment for the dinner party. I don't know. Yeah, maybe some stand-up comedians, but yeah, founders, buyers, and then some fun people.
uh, who made the biggest impact in your career?
Oh man, that's really hard. I think there was probably two people. I mean, man, actually, it's hard to answer. There was like someone in like an initial internship that I worked for that encouraged me to major in symbolic systems instead of econ.
What is symbolic system?
So yeah, symbolic systems is an interdisciplinary major that Stanford offers, and it's kind of like cognitive science. You study things like linguistics, probabilistic analysis, computer science, but really it's like understanding what are natural systems in the world that we could like convert to math. So like really messy things like language, how do we kind of convert that to math, and so we're seeing things like LLMs like do that. High level is like, what are the components of intelligence? So that set me up. I think, at the time I did it because, partially because I was encouraged by someone to just do something a little bit more unique. And I thought I didn't necessarily think it would be helpful for my career. I just thought it'd be very cool. And then it, definitely did end up being extra relevant to my career. So it definitely taught me to just, kind of follow my curiosity. So yeah, that was like one of the very first internships I worked on. Someone encouraged me to do symbolic systems. So yeah, that was definitely like one, major kind of piece of advice that made an impact on me.
Where can we find you outside work?
You can find me running around the trails of Twin Peaks and Sutro Forest. You can probably find me, most likely out and about. I'll be waiting in line for brunch at Pancake Boy in Noe Valley. It's like my favorite brunch spot. So often in line there.
Love. Okay, that's very specific. Well, Colton, thank you so much for coming on the show today. It was a fun conversation.
It was great speaking with you, Grace. Thanks for having me on.
Okay, let me quickly end stream. Sorry, it's